Okay, I take it we're being live streamed now.
Thumbs up, go ahead.
Okay, so I call this meeting to order. And we acknowledge with respect that we are meeting on the traditional territory of the Kwangdun speaking people. And we are honored to have the opportunity to build strong working relationships with the people of the Songhees and Esquimalt nations. I'm looking for approval of the agenda. Do I have anybody who wishes to change the agenda or has any questions? I'm not seeing any hands. Speak up if I'm not seeing you. Otherwise, the agenda is approved by unanimous consent. Adoption of the minutes. Similarly with the minutes, any changes or questions? I'm not, I think I saw a hand there.
McKay.
Hi, Rick. Go ahead.
In the package here, it's strategic direction summary, conceptual design removal. I don't remember discussing this at the last meeting because it's must have been in the last meeting, or where would it be removed? We never discussed that. About the Hope Bridge, the boating on the Esquimalt Lagoon, other overwater structures and expanded parking. I don't recall talking about it, yet it's removed now.
Let's approve the minutes of the last meeting. All good points.
Well, no, this is into the last meeting.
Hi, Mr. Chair. It's Ian here. I can provide some clarification.
So Rick, I think you're addressing what's coming in this meeting, not what's in the minutes. Am I right?
Well, when I'm saying removal, is this something we're going to discuss, or this has been predetermined previously? That's what I'm clarifying here.
I believe that's been mentioned for the first time as part of the documents for this meeting.
So this is not fait accompli then?
No.
Okay, good. Thank you. Sorry for the delay.
Anybody want to tell me I'm wrong about that?
Well, I want to, but you're not. So,
okay. So, not seeing any other hands or questions, I'm going to take the minutes of the last meeting or the June meeting actually, which I don't think was our last one, as approved by unanimous consent. Do we have any public participation?
Just a couple of people in the peanut gallery, Councillor Baxter, Helen and Brent sitting in the back row.
Was that Brent?
Yes, it is. Just Helen and I in the back row for you.
Okay. But no public that wishes to speak? Okay, we'll go on to new business. Mr. Borhill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And can everyone online hear me? That's great. So today before us is the presentation of the first half of what will be the draft Waterfront Stewardship Plan. The second half will comprise of an implementation plan. But today we're going to go through a recommended series of strategic directions underpinned by the results of our public engagement exercise that was just completed. So that was phase 2 of our public engagement that looked at the concept plans that were provided to the committee earlier this year. So here today to walk us through the draft strategic directions document is Paul DeGree, lead consultant on the Waterfront Stewardship project.
Thanks, Ian. Just get it, if the online people could give a thumbs up, just make sure they can hear me okay. And then Becky, if I could ask you to start the slideshow, that would be fantastic. So as Ian mentioned, I'm going to just walk through the slides. They were part of your agenda package, but essentially the agenda for today. Next slide, Becky. For this presentation is to talk through the strategic directions report, which really forms the basis for the work that is to be done as part of the Waterfront Stewardship Plan. So it's the first opportunity for you to see how the design team has responded to community feedback and the consultation process. And I'm happy to speak to the general sentiments that we've heard from the community. And I've tried to summarize those a little bit in this presentation. And then I'll actually give an example of the next step, the actual implementation plan, what that's going to look like. We're going to once we get sort of endorsement of where we're at now, we'll very quickly move to that next step of developing the actual plan, which is quite detailed and has costing associated with it and that sort of thing. So. And then, I'll just describe those next steps in a little bit more detail. Next slide, please. Territorial acknowledgement. Again, we're on the territories of the Coast Salish. Next slide, please. So you've seen this slide a number of times. We're really in the heart of this iterative design and engagement process now. We have heard from the community and we've adjusted those designs. Now we're bringing them back to you to talk about what ought to be part of the plan. Becky's just adjusting the screen here, but when you get back to your table there, if you go to the next slide. So the strategic directions report has about a half a dozen different sections in it. We've summarized the round 2 engagement, which is this engagement process that is just closed. We just finished with our last meeting last week with Songhees Nation Chief and Council. And I'll talk a little bit about active stewardship, which is something that emerged out of the consultation process. Talk a little bit about plan adjustments, and I've just for clarification, I changed the term on my presentation here from removals to plan adjustments, just to soften that a little bit. But then sort of the heart of the recommendations are centered around planning actions and then park improvements. So they comprise the real work of the Colwood Waterfront Stewardship Plan. Next slide, please. So as part of the second round of engagement, we had about 200 online survey responses and then about 300 sounding board responses. So pretty good reach in the community. We had 6 pop-up events, and Ian and I were estimating that we probably had somewhere around 100 people that would come into the tent and ask questions. Some of those conversations would last half an hour, 45 minutes. Others were very quick, but again, a pretty good reach into the community there. And then we had well over a dozen stakeholder presentations, formal presentations, and site walks. We had some stakeholders that I felt, and I believe Ian felt, needed a little bit more of a hands-on, I guess, conversation, a longer conversation. And again, some of those conversations lasted 2.5 hours on site. So opportunity there to explain more fully what the intent of the plan was and where we were at in the process. And then First Nations follow-up. We had a great meeting with Esquimalt Nation. And then, as I mentioned last week, we had our follow-up meeting with Songhees Nation as well. Next slide, please. So the general sentiments that I'm really trying to just distill on one slide here. I think the notion of ecological enhancement and protection of the environment really just keeps rising to the top as the principal kind of desired outcome for this area and for this project. We heard We had some specific questions around vehicle access and parking improvements, that sort of thing. And I have a slide that speaks to those issues a little bit more. And again, just a little bit of a varied response with respect to this being a regional destination versus a local amenity. And you can imagine that Colwood residents tend to trend towards keeping it as a local amenity, and then regional or people outside of the immediate area appreciating it as a local, as a regional destination, especially for things like birding, very important birding location. Leave it alone versus active stewardship. This was something that we heard, especially early on in the summer. We heard the members of the community saying, well, no, we just need to leave this alone. We love it the way it is. And again, some of those conversations ended up being a little bit longer conversations to talk about the need for active stewardship and to talk about the context for this project. And we've had the opportunity with the WCPC to talk about that issue, that the community is growing. We expect the neighborhoods around the lagoon, around Royal Beach area to grow and increase pressure on the waterfront. And we're also expecting the environment to change. We're expecting sea level to rise. And Monday was a good reminder of the energy that exists down on the shoreline with the storm that came through. Next slide, please. So I mentioned I had a little bit more information on the specifics around vehicles. So those two little graphs are from the survey responses and some of the sounding board responses. Seems we're kind of in this, I guess, some people for, some people against, but we're starting to trend towards some information around parking and two-way traffic. So the parking in particular, tendency towards decreasing parking, not increasing parking, which is interesting, given that vehicle access and the maintenance of vehicle access to Cobourg Peninsula still remains very high in feedback. But two-way traffic remained higher than one-way traffic, and those were specific questions that were responded to in the survey. Again, adaptive management, environmental protection ranked very high, and the raised walkway, interestingly, came out very high as well. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about active stewardship in a changing landscape, and really this centers around the notion of this disparity between wanting to leave the landscape alone and just keep it the way it is versus needing to actually proactively manage it in a way that actually addresses both community growth and the pressures that we're expecting to see from climate change and sea level rise. So I think where we're certainly going as a consulting team, as a design team, is that we really need to be controlling how people access this space and designing the facilities at the same time that we're enhancing the environment, and the two can actually be mutually supportive. So that's becoming a really core part of our thinking as we develop the designs. So in terms of the design adjustments, one of the things that next slide, please. One of the things that we heard through the consultation process, it came at us pretty hard right at the beginning and carried on through the summer, was the importance of the migratory bird sanctuary. And pretty much anything that was over water or that I guess impacted with the value of the migratory bird sanctuary, or that was seen to be impacting the habitat quality or the bringing people into that lagoon environment was essentially frowned upon, and we had quite an overwhelming response requesting that be one of the main adjustments in the plan. So where we're at right now in the recommendations we're making is to remove the notion of the Hope Bridge. And the reason for that is that, again, impacts to bird habitat, especially down in that southern finger of the lagoon, where water birds tend to congregate, but also opportunities to improve pedestrian infrastructure up Lagoon Road that this bridge is essentially negating the need for. So there's opportunity close by to provide the same kind of pedestrian link, just not in as dramatic a way. Boating on the lagoon, this was.
Can I just
Yes.
interrupt with the clarification? On the slide you're looking at right now, there's a lot of improvements to what is currently named Pitt House Park shown. Are these part of the waterfront plan?
Currently, they are part of the waterfront plan, yes. Pitt House Park, and the name we can talk about more if you like, but certainly Pitt House Park was identified as a component of the waterfront stewardship plan, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So, just again, just coming back to this notion of adjusting the plan to reflect the sensitivity around the migratory bird sanctuary. The only other element that really is distinct from that is the expanded parking. So, Coburg North, for example, where we had showed a more aggressive parking strategy with expanded parking capacity, we've scaled that. Or we're proposing to scale that back so that we retain the existing parking capacity along Coburg Peninsula. Next slide. So in the strategic planning or strategic directions report, there are 14 planning or policy actions that are identified, and essentially these establish the environment for achieving the guiding principles of the project. They establish the environment that's necessary to strengthen connectivity, to protect and enhance the environment. If we're going to be bringing people into this environment, we need the right planning and policy environment to make that happen. And then there's 25 park improvements proposed. And they're listed as separate design interventions, but the clarification I want to make here is as we move into the implementation plan, there will be specific guidance around which of these 25 interventions we think need to be developed concurrently. So when the plan actually starts to get built out, it may not be broken into 25 chunks. In fact, there might be 100 different elements that we price and that we identify or provide specifications for, but maybe only 10 different phases to the implementation strategy. So I apologize if that's a little bit complicated, but hopefully as we present the next section here, that becomes clear. So next slide. So the planning actions range from recommendations around sediment management to establishing First Nations engagement protocols to reviewing the migratory bird sanctuary and how Colwood's bylaws coordinate with that regulation. That is work that is ongoing in other communities around Greater Victoria as well. Oak Bay and Saanich in particular are going through this exercise. They've recognized they recognize that there are some enforcement challenges when a municipal bylaw is inconsistent with the overarching federal bylaw around control of that space. So there's a recommendation there, and so there's 14 of these policy recommendations. I haven't listed all of them here, but happy to answer questions or discuss those in more detail as required. Next slide, please. And then there's 25 different park improvements proposed in the strategic directions report, again, ranging from the overarching waterfront multi-use pathway, the continuous pathway along the waterfront, to signage programs, to different components of ecological restoration that are described in a little bit more detail. And south end, the elevated walkway. Again, happy to discuss specific elements in more detail as required. Next slide. So I just wanted to give a quick example of how the implementation plan is structured. And I used this example the last time we met in September as a way of showing how the plan has evolved through the public consultation process. So this is the Milburn section from the duplexes up to Lagoon Road, the foot of Lagoon Road. This was the initial plan that was presented to the community. We had some meetings with the neighbors there and received some specific feedback. Next slide. And then this is what the plan looks like today, with many of those finer grained nuances that we learned from the community and that we've since learned through our own research and site visits. So the plan's been adjusted and updated and we think improved. And they're reflected in these conceptual designs. Next slide. So the implementation plan, then this is where we're moving to the final report for the waterfront stewardship plan. We'll have 4 components. There'll be a detailed description of each design element, and then a description of the programming, so how that space will be used. So if we just take one, for example, here, number 13, there's on the bottom right image there's a small green patch. There's actually a small little drainage that comes through there. So we're proposing that drainage channel actually be enhanced, invasive species removed, and native plants restored in there, as in combination with the improvements to the pathway along the berm. So that element on its own will have detailed description of how to do that and the intended outcomes. Next slide. And then in addition to that element will be given some specifications. So what species of plants to use, how that space gets cleared or how it gets treated, and then a projected cost of the implementation of that piece. So currently there's about, we've identified about just over 100 different elements in the plan. So each one of those will be given these 4 levels of specificity with a cost associated with them. So next slide. So in terms of next steps, we're updating and refining concepts now. We're developing that implementation strategy with costing and priorities. And then once we have heard from you and once we reach a level of comfort, we'll go back out to the community and show them the progress for engagement round 3. And then through the winter, we expect to update and make any necessary changes and refine the plan. Next slide. And that's that. Thank you.
Right. Do we have any questions?
Yeah, McKay here.
I've got, one second, I've got Chris Ling with his hand up as well online. So I think Chris was first. So Chris?
Thank you. Yeah, thanks, Paul. I've got a couple of questions coming from the presentation there. The first one is, you mentioned there was one kind of division in the community between those that want to leave it alone versus an active management approach. Just thinking about the leave it alone group, is that a homogenous point of view, or is there a division in that group between those that don't want any changes at all versus those that want you to sort of incorporate a more kind of wilding approach to the ecological restoration, or, you know, rather than a sort of active management?
That's a great question. I think I guess the difference, the distinction that I was trying to make were the people who just wanted nothing to happen.
Right.
So no trail improvements, no rewilding, no. In other words, it's just not necessary to do anything. And then in the category of responses where there was an appreciation for the need to make improvements and that this is a stewardship project, the responses ranged from provision of amenities and upgrades, some of which included rewilding, ecosystem enhancement, and protection of those migratory bird sanctuary values.
And sort of riffing on that a little bit, I think. So in your discussion of the removal of the Hope Bridge idea, you sort of mentioned that there's the reasons for that is because that part of the lagoon is where there's probably the highest density of bird life. But then I noticed that's where you've allocated for the off-leash dog area, and that would also seem to be a bit of a tension with bird life. I don't know if that's an existing feature or, but, you know, I know there's been a big thing in the region in general recently around keeping the dogs away from the birds on the beaches and such like.
You're absolutely right. It's an issue that is forefront in the media right now. I know that the Saanich News in particular had 2 or 3 articles in this week's paper on this issue. As far as I know, and Ian can speak to this in more detail, but as far as I know, the off-leash dog area is to the south of the pump station, the washroom building, and on the outer shore. So currently the bylaw does not allow dogs on the lagoon side. But the issue of enforcement is something that other municipalities are struggling with, and Colwood, the way Colwood's bylaw is structured in relation to the migratory bird sanctuary bylaw, they're consistent, but there's a question around the ease of enforcement and how you help the public understand the boundaries and where dogs are permitted and where they're not. So potentially some clarifications, some conversations that Colwood could pursue around that to improve the effectiveness of protecting migratory birds, which is essentially the underlying desire.
And then sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to say, just perhaps I assume, like everywhere else, the bylaws are enforced by complaints and not much else.
If I could just jump in, Mr. Chair. So Paul effectively described what the current bylaw would require for on and off leash. The challenge is that at the high tide mark essentially is where dogs are allowed off leash, according to our bylaw. That's also commensurate with the boundaries of the migratory bird sanctuary. So that somewhat ambiguous line is a difficulty for enforcing where dogs can be on and off leash, and that line continues all the way down Cobourg Peninsula along the high tide mark.
Thank you.
Okay, Chris, so you've got what you need there?
I think so.
Okay, Rick.
Yeah, and regarding the boating on a Squamish Lagoon and other overwater structures, I'd just like some clarification around that. I read the business from CWS and some of their issues there. Would that mean then that the existing boat launches around the lagoon, which have been there, for instance, for perpetuity, are going to be shut down so nobody will be allowed on the lagoon? Because hardly anyone uses it at the moment. And then the ones who do use it are canoes, kayaks, sailboarders, and the likes. And Royal Roads has had a boat launch there since Royal Roads became Hatley Castle Incorporated, or whatever you want to call it. So then the biggest boat launch, public boat launch, is at the foot of Portsmouth. So I would assume that they're discouraging anyone and all from being on the water, even though the First Nations used to launch their canoes or dugouts near the bridge over the years. That's where they'd have their events or whatever they'd launch down there. Secondly, the bridge, which I think is a brilliant idea, I fail to understand how that's going to disturb the wildlife, because most of the birds down there, nesting birds or whatever, I don't know where they nest exactly, but in the spring, they're Canadian geese, and Canadian geese don't take a backseat to anybody. And I don't know what a bridge is going to affect the passage of birds going back and forth. Because the idea of connecting from the lagoon over to the Pit House Park is a brilliant suggestion. That means it's going to be an open corridor conduit that's going to go from the lagoon over to the Pit House, which then it can carry on over to Royal Roads or whatever. Because if it is eliminated and the Pit House Park band shell or whatever you want to call it is put into play, that means that Anchorage will be used as a parking, Goldfinch will be used as parking. People will be going through those neighborhoods for the most part. Not to saying they're not going to go through there, but there'll be an access and a corridor from the bridge over to the other side. So I need, to me, further clarification.
Who wants to tackle that?
It looks like Jason Nault actually has his hand up. I'm happy to speak to this as well, but Jason, through Councillor Baxter.
Okay. First, am I on?
Yes.
First, I'll have to say I disagree with my fellow committee member. The bridge is and always has been a terrible idea. It demolishes habitat at both ends of the bridge.
Jason, can I interrupt you, Jason?
Go ahead.
I think this period I was hoping would be for questions, and there are some questions of what is and what isn't going to be allowed in what Mr. McKay said. So I think we need answers to those, and then we can have a good debate about it once we've got the facts straight.
Okay, well then I have a question. One of the things on the summary was working towards a First Nations MOU. Is there any kind of time frame for that? Elsie has been trying for 15 years to get First Nations input and cooperation with a complete lack of any success. Has Colwood got a magic solution to this?
Okay, can I ask either Paul or Ian Borhill to tackle all of the questions we've had? But I'd just like to remind everybody that you are speaking publicly. This is being broadcast live. and will be recorded for eternity, or at least 40 years anyway. Carry on.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'll maybe start with the issue of structures into the lagoon and specifically boat launches. There is a policy within the Fish Community Plan that was first adopted in 2018 that discourages the construction of new docks within 100 meters of the lagoon. That being said, there was a strong response through our Parks and Rec Master Plan to increase the opportunity for launching small craft in the area of Esquimalt Lagoon and the waterfront. And so that's why it was incorporated into this plan to ground test that previous feedback we received. So it's been an issue that's been looked at over the years here in Colwood, and through the feedback we received from the public, it was felt that we would recommend removing that concept plan, which would align with what was previously called for in our Fish Community Plan. In terms of discouraging use of the existing boat launches, that is not a recommendation of the Strategic Directions Report. However, we're here to take feedback from the committee for the purposes of further drafts. The second question that I can recall from Member Nault, with respect to a timeline for a memorandum of understanding or protocol agreement with local First Nations, staff will be presenting options to council through our service review process that's going to be unfolding this fall, with options to fund and proceed with that work in the first half of 2022.
Okay, there was one more question there about what effect the bridge would have on wildlife and whether anything is known for certain about that. Personally, I have trouble seeing what effect the bridge would have, so I'd like the same answer.
Thank you for reminding me of that additional question. So I don't necessarily have the information with respect to what impacts there could be, but I can speak to some of the concerns that we heard from the public. Beyond the perceived impact to birds, there were concerns about additional access to that sensitive part of the migratory bird sanctuary and bringing more people to that area. There's concerns at the moment with respect to the feeding of birds at the lagoon. And I think that was part of the response from people who didn't think the bridge was a good idea. Anything to add to that, Paul?
Yeah, two quick little things to add. One is that that area is actually, just by virtue of the form of the landscape, is a point at which waterfowl congregate. So the idea of putting people into and directly over that space, I think, is perceived as a potential disturbance, which I think there's some validity to. And then the other issue that was pointed out is that there's a land-based component to the bridge crossing. So the bridge goes across and into and through, the pathway has to go through an intact riparian zone. And it was pointed out that that is actually one of the most pristine sections of riparian vegetation along the lagoon. So it was again perceived as a significant impact.
Okay, so that's all good answers. Any more questions?
Michael?
Hello?
Michael, may I?
Yeah. Please go ahead.
Okay.
Councilor
And I just, these are notes I made on reading the report, so they don't probably react or address completely the presentation. So if any of them you want to move to later or ignore, I'll accept that. That's fine. I guess as somewhat like I think has been brought up before, the First Nations consultations, where we're at on those. That was a question I had from reading it. The other point that I probably would make some sense to reflect in the report somewhere, for the people who are still looking for a natural beach or feel that's the way it should be, My sense is that south of the sort of the center line of Royal Bay, that beach is not where nobody's anticipating doing anything on the beach down there. I don't think that Royal Bay is doing some stuff sort of upland, but the beach itself, I don't think anybody's looking at a walkway going south from the center of Royal Bay or anything like that. So there's going to be a lot of natural beach there extending into Metchosin. So, you know, I sympathize with people who like beaches the way they are, but they will have that opportunity, and probably for dogs as well too. In reading the report, I noticed it sort of took sediment nourishment as being a given. And I didn't think that we had got there with this committee yet, that although it's been sort of bantied about, I don't think we've had a discussion to sort of go, yes, great idea, or yes, let's do this much bit of that. And I think maybe that's coming with the David Ford presentation. So maybe it's coming. One of the things I was curious about in here is actually the road cross section and the cyclists. Where do we anticipate cyclists? Are they always to be on the multi-use trail, or would they be put on the actual existing road, you know, as they use now? And would we widen the road for bike lanes or anything like that? Probably something that should be addressed. I thought we could perhaps, I don't know if this is here or somewhere, but we talk a lot about the different stewardship groups, and the city of Colwood and the Waterfront Committee, and it might be kind of nice to sort of say, you know, who reports to who, or who's leading the parade here, or do we have a bunch of groups doing things separately? I also don't think in here that we've addressed the lifespan of the sewage lift station, which I think was one of the intriguing parts that commenced this work. So somewhere in there, I think we should be, I mean, I think that was one of the things we set out to discuss and think about. So somewhere in there would be useful. And a lot of the work that Paul has done recently sort of centers around the importance of the migratory bird sanctuary, which is fine. I support that, except frankly, I don't know how good a bird sanctuary that is, to be honest. It would be useful to sort of say, and by God, you know, we've got 20 red listed species that come here and nowhere else in North America, or yeah, there's a lot of geese there and not much else. It sort of, you know, would be nice to have a sense of, is it still the incredible sanctuary it was 100 years ago when it was created, or, you know, have we gone too far to rehabilitate it? I don't know. So those were just some thoughts I made and wrote down as I read the report. So I don't know how many of those warrant an answer right here and now, but that's my thoughts.
Okay. I'm not sure if there's anything in there that actually needs an answer, but it did sound like you were suggesting that if it's not the last of its kind in America, we should not worry about it. I'm not sure that's really going to be the attitude we need to take towards preserving wildlife. Have I misunderstood you, Councillor Parkinson?
Only what I'm trying to suggest is that if we're using the migratory bird sanctuary as a rationale for a number of decisions, which we seem to be, we should put some validity to it. You know, some people may think it's not much, others may think it's great. So yeah, if it's a bird sanctuary and a functioning and good bird sanctuary, I think we should stress that in the report and say, here's why we're doing all these things. It's because it does all this and that, whether it's, as you said, the last bird in North America or just a whole bunch of nice birds. So that's all. No, I'm not trying to downplay it at all. I just think that for people who go, don't do anything, and people who go, it's a migratory bird sanctuary, we should have some rationale in there.
Mr. Borhill or Mr. DeGreef, any responses?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd just like to speak to a couple of Councillor Parkinson's comments relating to the emissions in the draft plan. I just want to speak to the ongoing projects that will be addressing them. So we've sent out invitations to a workshop in the first week, or excuse me, the second week of December. That would include members of the Waterfront Coastal Processes Committee to look at the body of work that's been compiled over the years as it relates to bulk sediment transport. And the objective of that exercise is to develop recommendations for council on the issue of beach nourishment as an effective approach in our waterfront, as well as recommendations relating to the long-term planning for the sewer lift station. So that those issues are being addressed through that separate sister project and not currently contained in this draft report.
Mr. DeGreef?
Yeah, I have, I thought rather than address each item specifically, I thought I'd make just a general comment. These are exactly the kinds of comments and feedback that as a consultant, I find extremely helpful. And I think the work, I'm just kind of reflecting on the work that some of my colleagues have done in support of the design work and that preceded the design work. And we've been at this now since March, and some of the initial environmental analysis and archaeological analysis, it seems a bit of a distant memory now, but there was some pretty major heavy lifting that happened in preparation of those reports, and they're very good. And I've had chance to go back and review those reports. And just as an example, the migratory bird sanctuary is discussed in detail, and the number of red listed and blue listed species and sensitive ecosystems are all listed in that report. But this is a perfect opportunity to bring that forward in a condensed form to say, you know what, here's why we think this is important. So I really appreciate the comments, and I think that I can hit each one and provide clarity on each of those as we move to the final report. So thank you.
So just a follow-up question there, Paul. Will all of those, the report you mentioned on the different types of bird species and also other backup reports to this, will they eventually be attached to the final report as appendices?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not entirely sure how Colwood wants to manage those reports. They are a formal part of the project record, and I believe that they would be resource documents under the WCPC. So the multidisciplinary shoreline assessment report, for example, was presented. Comments were received from the committee, and then the document was revised and submitted as a final report. So that document is part of your record.
If I could just add, Mr. Chair, the background reports are foreseen by staff to be appendices to the main plan. So that is what we're looking at, how to package that final draft. The documents that provide background literature reviews and background data are, as much as possible, been compiled in the Waterfront Coastal Processes document setter on our website. So we had a couple additions to that document setter just over the last month that were addressing migratory bird sanctuary issues and the species and ecology as it relates to birds there.
Okay, thank you. I see Chris Ling with his hand up again. Do I have any other first timers who wish to ask questions? Chris, go ahead.
Thank you. Just to sort of build on that last discussion around the quality of otherwise of the migratory bird sanctuary, is there an intention to deliberate, if there is which I assume there will be a component of ecological restoration in this plan, is there an intention to specifically address maybe a lack of quality of the current migratory bird sanctuary? Or is it primarily looking at the sort of the landward aspects of the ecological restoration?
Anyone, Ian or Paul, wish to deal with that?
Yeah, I think the way I've interpreted the design process is that this is a physical plan. So it's not necessarily a management plan that's going to look at water quality and then address policies and instruments that might affect water draining to the lagoon from Colwood Creek, for example. So in terms of physical improvements, we've identified salt marsh and riparian vegetation enhancements along the lagoon shoreline as a key opportunity. And that's starting we're starting to put the flesh on the bones on that, so to speak, in the implementation plan. So, and it becomes an integral part of the waterfront walkway design. So if you're going to keep people on a pathway and not have them crisscrossing through the landscape, which is kind of what happens now, vegetation helps achieve that and actually reinforces the experiential quality of the pathway. So that's the approach we're taking now, and I think those two in particular, the riparian vegetation enhancement and the salt marsh habitat enhancement, have the potential of really improving that fringe habitat quality for the migratory bird sanctuary.
Thank you. Okay, so unless anybody else has any questions right now, I have a series of questions. So I will go ahead. This first one is particularly for Mr. Boorhill. So under GP4 in the draft report, it says develop a shoreline sediment management program. Now we've got two things going on here at once. We've got the engineering side dealing with what's happening with sea level rise and sediment travel, and then we've got the overall plan. And I'm assuming that these are going to lead to two separate but linked and hopefully coordinated reports or series of reports. Is that correct, Mr. Boyle?
Yes, Mr. Chair. We tried as best as possible to align the timelines of the two projects that are coming forward. So what we're hoping to do is to have a final draft of the waterfront stewardship plan in front of the committee before the end of the year, and then also have a draft technical memorandum from the process that we're undertaking to develop recommendations on sediment management and related impacts to infrastructure.
Thank you. Yeah, the timeline seems to be working out quite well. So I have a question for Mr. DeGreef. Does the current version of the plan and your thinking on the plan assume anything we will do or will not do to react to climate change and erosion generally?
So, so in terms of the physical changes, are we specifically addressing climate-related impacts?
Well, I'll give you an example. I would, because there are houses at risk before the end of the century, one might imagine that we could consider building dikes to protect them. And I'm making an assumption that you have assumed that that isn't actually on the table.
Yeah, that's a.
Hi, Mr. Chair. I can maybe help Paul out on this question.
Well, no, because I'm looking for his opinion. I know that dikes are not on the table, but it's just an example of something that we're all proceeding with, assuming is not on the table, even though we haven't made a final decision on what we are going to do. So is there anything else like that where the report is making an assumption?
Yeah,
So if I may, Mr. Chair, I'll
Okay,
allow Mr. DeGreeve to answer the question. However, when council first directed staff to undertake this project, it was originally conceived of as a public realm improvement plan. The project was designed around primarily the public spaces and the aspects of the waterfront that are associated with public spaces in the public realm. And therefore the scope of the work really focused the consultant's attention to those areas. The work that we're doing with Associate Engineering and their sub-consultants on both sea level rise and tsunami risk, as well as now the bulk sediment transport, is hoped to result in the information we need to make recommendations as it relates to things like physical protection structures, as you've mentioned, to sea level rise, and then or also policy approaches to the threats to private property that are related to sea level rise. So we're looking at that as being coming out of that body of work with the coastal engineering.
I understand all of that, but I would imagine that you would agree with me that we are all assuming that we are not going to try and protect the houses at risk by building dikes.
I think that's a fair statement.
Well,
maybe
Mr. Borhill specifically.
Just can't please them today, can you?
So I can't answer that question in terms of what the results of the ongoing the technical
No,
work.
I don't want you to answer it in terms of what the results will be, but would you not agree that we are all assuming that dikes are not part of the answer, even though we don't have the answer?
Insofar that our coastal inundation mapping suggests that structures like dikes could present an option. I just don't have that information. In the tsunami risk report that was provided to the committee earlier this year, they talked about different physical structures that could be developed to mitigate tsunami risk. I don't believe we looked at that for sea level rise, and I can't say that I've put specific thought into that issue, but it would be something that we want to look at through the coastal adaptation plan that I'm speaking later this year and next.
Okay, I don't think I'm getting anywhere with that line of questioning, so I will desist.
do you mind if I take a stab at a response, Councillor Baxter?
Go ahead.
I'm thinking back to my Green Shores training and trying to imagine a response that's framed around Green Shores tactics. So the Green Shores tactics are grouped into 4 categories, and I think I've at some point I presented a slide to this committee that outlined those 4 options. One of them is protect, as you've outlined, which the dike would fall into the category of. Another is retreat, so just moving back from the shoreline, and then nourish would actually fall into the protection category, because you're actually building a beach that is actually protecting the shoreline from erosion. So, and then there's other options that fit there too. I think in terms of the open space plan and the approaches that we've applied and the assumptions that we've made. So the raised boardwalk is a retreat and adapt option. So we're raising above the landscape to allow the landscape to I guess change and modify underneath, and we're pulling it back as far as we can from the shoreline. So it's a combination of retreat and adapt, and then actually all the way along Cobourg Peninsula, the idea of putting a dune, rebuilding a dune towards the outer shore from the multi-use pathway or the modified parking, and we've revised our drawings slightly to reflect this. The idea of building a dune there is actually kind of a Green Shores type protect strategy. So it's actually a structure that helps to mitigate against log throw back over to the facilities that you're adding and improving. So it's not super explicit in the way we've communicated it so far, but maybe it ought to be. And so I think like Councillor Parkinson's comments, maybe there's an opportunity here to actually describe the strategies, even if they're subtle, to describe those in a little bit more detail on how we intend to design in such a way that the facilities that we're proposing to add are protected.
I think that's an excellent point. Thank you. Thank you. That's very good.
His point.
And in 2.11 and also in 2.12 in the report, we say building resilience to rising sea levels. So I think what you just spoke about is how you would achieve that building resilience. Is that right?
That's correct.
Yeah, okay. So that answers my question on that. Okay, I think I'm good. Thank you very much. So now, having dealt with everybody's questions, I think it's time to consider whether anybody actually wants to propose any significant change to the draft report, which is the purpose of this meeting. So does anybody have anything they want to put forward? Have I got a hand up that I can't see? Nope.
No,
Okay. Well, that would look like everybody's quite happy with the report as is. And I'm just looking to see if staff have recommended a motion of acceptance or any such thing.
Hi, Mr. Chair. So all we're asking for from the committee today is for feedback. And so this is an opportunity for the committee, as you've already provided, to give us thoughts on this draft before we come back at the end of November with the final draft plan. So that draft plan, as I mentioned earlier, will have an implementation plan component, as well as cost estimates for the proposed improvements and enhancements to the waterfront.
Okay.
Michael,
Yes, Councillor Parkinson.
can I just ask, so my sense is that this report's going to have whatever it was, the 25 little pieces to construct. I'm assuming that there's a step between this report and actually constructing stuff to sort of look in each of those sections and say, well, this was Paul's thoughts, and now, 1 year, 3 year, 5 years later, we've evolved and we want to do something different. I mean, I think we have to mention in here that this is the conceptual design that everybody maybe think is good today, but as we progress down this road, we're going to alter it and then tweak it and make it better probably along the way. So I think it's probably appropriate to flag in there that what's being shown is not necessarily the finished product. It's what the finished product could be, but yeah, sorry, I just wanted to.
Yeah, I think we're being told this is very much a draft that has to go through a third round of public engagement. So I guess what we're considering is whether we want to give any commentary on what the public should see in the third round from our point of view. Is that agree with staff and consultant?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, it would. I mean, essentially, we've got two big steps before this plan becomes adopted by council. So we've got the third round of engagement, as you've mentioned, that we're getting final feedback on the draft plan. Then also the council process where we would take this to council and ask for their comment and final endorsement. So we're also looking at how we can support council in the process of implementing this plan in 2022 onwards. So this was asked to be a 10-year plan with capital expenses being costed out for the improvements that would be recommended. We're looking at options that through our upcoming budget deliberations and service review such that there could be monies in place for the scoping and design of projects that are recommended in the final plan.
One thing that's sort of bothering me about all this is when we do the public engagement in third round, will there be a large plan presented at what I hope are going to be in-person opportunities for engagement, which I think you had in the second round? Sort of a large plan of the entire area with all of the locations where there are proposed improvements located on that plan, so that it's possible to see the whole thing as one picture. Is that something that we're going to do?
Thank you for that question, Mr. Chair. Certainly happy to take any ideas or feedback from from members of the committee or the committee itself on how we should approach that round 3. I think a plan that showed all of the improvements and interventions along the entire waterfront would be a great idea. I think we were envisioning the third round of engagement to be focused around the city's website and Let's Talk Hallwood survey feature. But happy to take feedback, as I said, on how we should approach that.
Okay, well, let me just put that forward as a suggestion then, that in some way we let people have a chance to see one plan with everything marked on it, including me, and whether that can be managed on the website or whether it needs to be put up for people to see when they come and visit City Hall or whatever you think is appropriate. Let me just leave that out there as a suggestion. Okay, so the recommendation from staff, I eventually found. I'm having trouble working with electronics only and not having a paper copy, but I got there. The recommendation is that the Waterfront Coastal Processes Committee provide commentary to staff on the draft preliminary findings and strategic directions report dated October 21st, 2021. So we have given a good deal of commentary implicit in our questions and in addition to our questions. But does anybody else have anything they wish to say in commentary? Now will be your last chance.
I could throw this out. I could throw this out perhaps for I mean, do we have any idea of Royal Beach's plans along their section? I know they're supposed to be doing a park plan and something. You can be sure people are going to be asking about potential coordination and what's happening. Do we have any idea where they're at on that? Anybody heard anything yet?
Yes, in fact, staff are working with the consulting team at Royal Beach on that very issue. We actually have, our consultants are actually cross-populated with some of the consultants that are working for Royal Beach. So there's a good connection in that regard. There is a couple of different parks planning initiatives happening with impacting Royal Beach and Royal Bay. So we're talking on a daily basis with our counterparts in development services who are managing those processes.
So if there was to be a plan showing the whole foreshore, it might extend to the end of Royal Beach?
Yes, I mean, the study area for this planning process included the foreshore extending all the way to Royal Beach. So it is expected that would be included.
Cool.
Great.
3 feet of plan.
Okay, if we have no other bits of commentary to add, then it's time to discuss next meeting. And I'm not hearing anything. So the next meeting will be Thursday, November 25th, 2021. And I'm looking for a motion to adjourn.
Yep.
Okay, I think I've seen Mr. McKay waving, and I think I heard Councilor Parkinson as well. So that's the motion to adjourn. We're adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Does a meeting to adjourn require a seconder? Doesn't. Although I'm still learning all that.